Okay, we're almost there. We've been learning about how polio is a man-made disease. In the last video, we learned about how shots and tonsillectomies can give the poliovirus a free ride into the nervous system. Now we're going to learn about the main reason polio is man-made. The reason probably the majority of people were getting paralyzed from the poliovirus. If you try to find out why the poliovirus started to paralyze people, you won't get a very good answer. You can look at all the polio history books on the planet, all the medical books, Wikipedia, CDC, or the World Health Organization, and none of them will tell you why. They will say things like, the mechanisms by which poliovirus spreads to the central nervous system are poorly understood, but it appears to be primarily a chance event. That's what Wikipedia says. It's been over 100 years since the poliovirus was discovered, and besides provocation polio and the tonsillectomies, no one seems to have a solid idea why the virus started making its way into people's spinal columns. Because the disease is not a problem anymore, they really don't seem to care. Before I tell you the third and most important reason polio is a man-made disease, I want to address something. A reason people will use to explain why polio started paralyzing people in the late 1800s. We all know that many of the diseases that used to plague humanity, like smallpox, scarlet fever, cholera, diphtheria, tuberculosis, etc., most of the mortality from these diseases was brought to near zero because of improvements in nutrition, medical care, and sanitation. But interestingly, people will blame improvements in sanitation on the rise in polio. How does that work? Well, it actually makes sense on the surface. The poliovirus is often transmitted in sewage through what is pleasantly referred to as the fecal-oral route. Because the poliovirus lives in your gut, you excrete it when you go to the bathroom. If you live in less than sanitary conditions, you're going to pick up the virus as a kid and develop immunity to it. But in a cleaner environment, you'd probably not be exposed to the poliovirus as a child, but later on in life when you're older. Many people theorize that this is why more people started getting paralyzed from polio, because they lived in cleaner conditions that kept them from getting infected as children. If this doesn't strike you as a little odd, it should. The sanitation argument basically says that people were getting polio infections later in life. It says the average age of infection changed. It went up. And that for some reason, you were more likely to become paralyzed from the virus when you were older than if you had caught it when you were an infant. There are a couple of things that don't support this theory. Early on, it was mostly younger children, not older people, who were getting paralyzed. Secondly, the first polio outbreak recorded in the United States in 1894 Vermont happened in a rural farming community where there had been no change to their sanitation method for 100 years. Nothing that would have upset the fragile balance of natural polio infection timing. Also, the worst polio outbreak in the history of the United States happened in New York City in 1916, a place and time that was not an ideal model of sanitation, if you've ever seen pictures. Let me just say this. Improvements in sanitation could certainly have changed the frequency at which people were exposed to the poliovirus. With improvements in sanitation, they would have been exposed to the virus less often. But that's all it changed. Improved sanitation had nothing to do with the virulence of the virus or the reason it was able to migrate from people's intestines into their spinal cords. Something else did. Something man-made. What was it? If you haven't noticed it yet, let me point out something interesting to you. Provocation polio, the polio that you get when the poliovirus is pushed into your nervous system by a shot or injection, the paralysis starts right at the injection site and progresses from there. And with the tonsillectomies, the kind that seem to trigger bulbar polio, the bulbar region of your brain sits directly behind and just above your tonsils. For both of these types of polio, there seems to be a geographical relationship to the point of entry of the virus. Injection site arm, paralysis arm. Tonsillectomy here, paralysis originating here. When you see the geographical relationship of how polio paralyzes, the final and most common cause and route of paralytic polio becomes fairly obvious. I'm going to explain that, the thing you've been waiting for, in the next video. I promise. You better watch.